The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless downpour that turned the streets into rivers and the night into a blur of shadows. Ember sat in her small apartment above the tattoo parlor where she worked, the faint hum of her neon sign casting an eerie glow through the window. She was used to the solitude of her nights, the quiet after the buzz of the tattoo gun faded and the last client left. But tonight, the silence felt heavier, as if the storm outside had seeped into her bones. She had just finished sketching a new design, a twisted skeletal tree with roots that seemed to writhe and curl like fingers reaching for something unseen. It was a piece for a regular client, a man who always requested dark, intricate designs but never spoke much about himself. Ember had always found him a little unsettling, but he tipped well, and his request challenged her skills. Still, something about tonight made her uneasy. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was the way he had lingered after his last session, his eyes scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. Ember shook off the feeling and stood, stretching her stiff muscles. She padded to the kitchen, her bare feet cold against the linoleum floor, and poured herself a glass of wine. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. She was about to settle onto the couch with a book when she heard it, a faint knock at the door downstairs. She froze, the glass halfway to her lips. Who would be out in this weather, and at this hour? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Ember set the glass down and crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The street below was empty, save for the occasional car splashing through the puddles. She couldn't see anyone at the door. Her heart began to race. Maybe it was just the wind or a branch tapping against the building. But the knock came a third time, sharp and deliberate. Ember hesitated, then grabbed her phone and made her way downstairs, her pulse pounding in her ears. She flipped on the porch light and peered through the peephole. No one was there. She unlocked the door and opened it, just a crack, the cold wind whipping rain into her face. The street was still empty. She stepped out onto the porch, her eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing. Just the storm and the faint glow of the streetlights. She was about to go back inside when she noticed something on the doorstep. A small, crumpled piece of paper, soaked from the rain. Ember picked it up, her fingers trembling. She unfolded it carefully, the ink smudged but still legible. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of her tattoo parlor with a single word scrawled beneath it, soon. Her breath caught in her throat. She crumpled the paper and shoved it into her pocket, her mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? A threat? She locked the door behind her and hurried back upstairs, her heart pounding. She checked every window, every lock, but everything seemed secure. Still, the feeling of unease wouldn't leave her. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Ember tried to distract herself with her book, but the words blurred together, her mind unable to focus. She jumped at every creak of the old building, every gust of wind that rattled the windows. Finally, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. She woke to the sound of glass breaking. Her eyes snapped open, her body rigid with fear. The room was dark, the only light coming from the neon sign outside. She held her breath, listening. There it was again, the sound of shattering glass coming from downstairs. Ember's mind raced. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. The operator's voice was calm, reassuring, but Ember could barely speak. "Someone's in my shop," she whispered. "I think they're trying to break in." The operator told her to stay where she was, to lock her bedroom door and wait for the police. Ember did as she was told, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the intruder could hear it. She pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sound from below. For a moment there was nothing. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs. She backed away from the door, her eyes darting around the room for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself. Her tattoo gun was on the desk, but it was useless. She grabbed a pair of scissors instead, clutching them tightly in her hand. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Ember held her breath, her entire body trembling. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door creaked open. She could see a shadow in the doorway, tall and broad, but the details were obscured by the darkness. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped into the room, and the light from the neon sign caught his face. It was him, the client with the dark tattoos. His eyes locked onto hers, and he smiled, a cold, predatory grin that made her blood run cold. "Hello, Ember," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I've been waiting for this." She didn't think. She just acted. With a scream, she lunged at him, slashing wildly with the scissors. He dodged easily, grabbing her wrist and twisting it until she dropped the weapon. She kicked and thrashed, but he was too strong, pinning her against the wall with one hand while the other reached into his pocket. "Don't worry," he said, pulling out a roll of duct tape. "This won't take long." Ember's mind raced. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't. With a surge of adrenaline, she brought her knee up, catching him in the stomach. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for her to slip free. She bolted for the door, but he was faster, grabbing her by the hair and yanking her back. She screamed again, louder this time, hoping someone would hear her. He slapped a hand over her mouth, his breath hot against her ear. "Shut up," he hissed. "You're only making this harder." She bit down hard on his hand, tasting blood. He cursed, releasing her, and she took off down the stairs, her bare feet slipping on the wet floor. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps heavy and fast. She reached the front door and yanked it open, the cold rain hitting her like a slap. She ran, her heart pounding, her lungs burning. The streets were empty, the storm still raging. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. She glanced over her shoulder and saw him following, his face twisted with rage. She turned a corner, her feet slipping on the wet pavement, and crashed into a dumpster. Pain shot through her side, but she forced herself to keep moving. She ducked into an alley, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear him getting closer, his footsteps echoing off the walls. She spotted a fire escape and scrambled up, her hands slipping on the wet metal. She reached the top and pulled herself onto the roof, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She crouched behind a ventilation unit, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She heard him below, his footsteps slowing as he searched the alley. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't look up. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of metal creaking as he started to climb the fire escape. Ember's mind raced. She had to do something, anything. She looked around, her eyes landing on a loose brick. She grabbed it, her hands shaking, and waited. She could hear him getting closer, his breathing heavy and labored. As his head appeared over the edge of the roof, she stood and hurled the brick with all her strength. It hit him square in the face, and he let out a grunt of pain, losing his grip and tumbling back down the fire escape. She didn't wait to see if he got up. She took off across the roof, her legs burning with the effort. She reached the other side and looked down. The drop was too far, but she had no choice. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps pounding on the roof. She took a deep breath and jumped, landing hard on the pavement below. Pain shot through her ankles, but she forced herself to keep moving. She ran, her vision blurring with tears until she saw the flashing lights of a police car. She waved her arms, screaming for help. The officers rushed to her side, their voices calm but urgent as they helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" one of them asked, his hand steady on her arm. Ember shook her head, though her body ached and her mind was still reeling. "He's here," she gasped. "He was just here. You have to find him." The officers exchanged a glance, and one of them radioed for backup while the other stayed with her. "Can you describe him?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Ember nodded, her teeth chattering from the cold and the fear. "He's tall, broad shoulders. He's one of my clients. He has tattoos, dark, intricate designs. He's dangerous. Please, you have to find him." The officer nodded, his expression grim. "We'll search the area. Stay here with my partner." Ember watched as he drew his flashlight and began sweeping the alley, his movements careful and deliberate. She wanted to feel relief, but the fear was still there, gnawing at her insides. He was still out there. She could feel it. The second officer led her to the patrol car, helping her into the back seat. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," he said, his voice gentle. "But we need you to stay here while we search for him. Can you do that?" Ember nodded, though every fiber of her being screamed to run, to hide, to do anything but sit still. She watched through the rain-streaked window as more police cars arrived, their lights casting eerie shadows on the walls of the alley. Officers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for the intruder. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Ember's mind raced with thoughts of what could happen if they didn't find him. What if he was still watching her? What if he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Suddenly there was a shout, a sharp, urgent cry that made Ember's blood run cold. She leaned forward, straining to see through the rain. One of the officers was running toward the patrol car, his face pale. "We found something," he said, his voice tight. "You need to see this." Ember's stomach dropped. She stepped out of the car, her legs trembling as she followed the officer back into the alley. They stopped near the dumpster where she had hidden, and the officer shone his flashlight on the ground. There, scrawled in the wet pavement, was a message. "I'll be seeing you soon, Ember." Her breath caught in her throat. He had been here, right under their noses, and they hadn't even realized it. The officers exchanged grim looks, their expressions hardening. "We're not leaving you alone," one of them said firmly. "We'll take you to the station, get a statement, and make sure you're safe." Ember nodded, though the fear was still there, clawing at her chest. As they led her back to the car, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching her, waiting for his next opportunity. And as the patrol car pulled away, she glanced out the window one last time. In the shadows of the alley, she thought she saw a figure standing there, his face obscured but his presence unmistakable. He raised a hand as if in farewell, and then disappeared into the darkness. Ember's heart sank. This wasn't over, not even close. If you enjoyed Ember's harrowing tale of survival, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And remember, the next time you hear a knock at your door late at night or feel the unsettling prickle of being watched, don't ignore it. Some dangers are closer than they appear. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.